Hey everyone, I'm Jay Shear, and welcome to Business Minds Coffee Chat. The goal of this show is to share insights, help to lift and inspire others, and deliver practical, meaningful, and actionable content. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about leadership and practical strategies for reaching new heights. The late Dr. Stephen R. Covey said, "Humble leaders are more concerned with what is right than being right." Our guest today knows a thing or two about humility. And for 15 years, he worked closely with Dr. Covey, author of the enduring bestseller, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He's a husband and father, a leadership expert, the #1 Amazon and Wall Street Journal best-selling author of the books Management Mess to Leadership Success, Everyone Deserves a Great Manager, and the highly anticipated Master Mentors. He's an Inc.com columnist and the host of the world's largest and fastest growing leadership development podcast, On Leadership with Scott Miller, where he interviews the leading thinkers of our time, such as Brendan Burchard, Ed Milet, Dr. Daniel Amen, and Ryan Holiday. He spent 4 years working for the Walt Disney Company in Orlando before being recruited and embarking on his nearly 25-year career with FranklinCovey, where he's the Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership. Please welcome the man who reads more than 200 books a year, Scott Miller. Scott, welcome to the show.
Jay, where is my mother when you read all of that? That was like the best introduction ever. Thank you.
Oh, I got to tell you, I have so much enjoyed researching and learning about you. It's what an incredible journey you've been on. So
Yes, but the journey has been usually 3 steps forward, 4 steps back. So don't let that narrative fool your listeners and viewers, right? Everyone's journey is rife with messes and potholes. And mine has been.
Yes, absolutely. And you dedicated an entire book to that, which we'll talk a little bit about that, because I love your writing style. I love the way that you tell stories, and you're so transparent and authentic about your message. So you're absolutely willing and open to talk about the messes, because we have to get through those messes to overcome and become great leaders.
It's true. Bring it on. Bring it on.
So I was curious, what was your vision for your career, and what were some of the early life lessons that influenced the work that you're doing today?
Well, I'll admit, early on, my career was probably a little bit accidental, like I think most people's careers are, right? You kind of went where the opportunities presented themselves. And then I got really clear in my mid-20s around what I thought success looked like. So I started to pattern myself quite deliberately around other people's careers, probably to some good and some bad. But I began to follow the careers of CEOs and chief revenue officers. Kind of thought I probably would be in sales and sales leadership, so I did that. I had some great experience in Europe and in Chicago with the company. I mentioned I was with Disney for 4 years. That was an accident. It was a hometown company. It wasn't really my choice. They kind of chose me, and it paid well, and it was a good op out of college. So I kind of followed things a little bit haphazardly early on, and then got a little bit more deliberate. The biggest lesson I've learned is probably the biggest success that I've mastered, which is friending up. And this sometimes is misinterpreted as opportunistic, but one of the things that I advise people is one of the best policies that I pursued, life policies, was always hanging out with, becoming friends with, associating with people who were smarter, older, more educated, more cultured, quite frankly, more successful and wealthier than I was. So in my mid-20s, I started hanging out, not with fraternity brothers, but with the mayor, or with the top real estate broker in town, or executives at Disney. And through most of my career, my peer group have always been a good 15 to 20 years older than me, a comma or two more in earning than me. And it's paid off handsomely, not in terms of income per se, but just in learning from others' mistakes and learning how they dealt with their mistakes when I was faced with the same crossroads or decision, whether it was my marriage vows, whether it was cutting corners on ethics, whether it was whatever you're faced with in life, you're going to honor or dishonor. I learned a lot from people who are older than me. My wife is 12 years younger than I am.
Okay.
When she first met me, she wondered, I was like maybe 40. Why are all your friends like 60? Why are we going to Greece with like, 55-year-olds? And then she realized that instrumental in my success was hanging out with people who had made more mistakes than I had, but I learned from them and achieved more success. And it's been the single most defining contributor to my career has been friending up. So there's always been reciprocity in those friendships, and they continues to be that today as well.
That's amazing, especially to learn that lesson at the ripe old age of 20 or in your 20s. Was that it? And you mentioned that you were following the career of others, but was that something that your parents had instilled in you? Is that just something that you had learned through watching others? Because it said
it was probably me being just shrewd.
just shrewd.
I don't think it was. I'll take credit for that. I think I don't know if I coined that term, but I've always called it friending up. And it's probably one of the most misunderstood phrases that I use. But if you were to line up all of the people that I friended up to in this living room, I don't think any one of them would say that I took more than I've given them in terms of helping them stay relevant. I had one of my mentors just a few weeks ago call me. He runs a large association in America, and he wanted to know my advice on pivoting their professional development to online. And I talked him through how I thought if he didn't do it, he'd be seen as a dinosaur immediately. We coached through the platforms he could use, and we hung up, and I would think that he would say, Scott was really helpful to me in this new phase of his career, as he was helpful to me early on. So I think they all would say the benefit has been mutually reciprocal.
Yeah, love that.
I hope.
Yeah, very interesting. So I want to shift for a moment and talk about your new book, Master Mentors, which I believe is due to be released early next year.
Yep, in early 2021. My manuscript is due in the next 9 days, so I'm sweating it right now.
Well, I tell you, you're very active on social media, and I love when you post who the next mentor is going to be. And I tell you, I'm almost waiting with bated breath to find out who the next one is, because it just keeps getting better and better as you go along. So the overall premise of that book is that you distill 40 essential learnings from top business leaders and thought leaders. And that list of mentors is truly insane. What has the experience been like writing that book?
Well, thank you for asking. You're actually the first interview I've actually granted even talking about the book, because it's not finished. It's almost finished. And to your point, HarperCollins is publishing it in 2021. It'll be an annual volume. So every year I'll publish volume 2 with 40 new mentors. The writing of it's been insightful for me to go back and select what is one insight from Seth Godin, right? What is one insight from Donald Miller? What is one insight from General McChrystal? And I think it's going to be a very timely book. And the insights aren't always from the podcast. Like, for example, Seth Godin's insight came from me being in his kitchen 7 years ago, and something he taught me about the difference between being fearless and being reckless. In fact, that is the insight from the Seth Godin chapter, is don't confuse fearless with reckless. I interviewed Stephanie McMahon, who of course is the chief brand officer of WWE, right? Vince McMahon and Linda McMahon. She's a diva. She's also the chief brand officer. The insight is nothing she said on the podcast about branding, but actually it's how she treated us off camera prior to the interview. Here's this massive celebrity married to a famous wrestler, right? She was so gracious and so kind and so accommodating. It was the opposite of what you think, perhaps a diva's personality might be. And it reminded me to always carry that through in all of my podcasts, right? Show up on time. Make sure your laptop's plugged in. Make sure that you give your guest respect and make that your brand. She taught me more about personal brand than she did about corporate brand. So it's all those, it's been a fascinating journey to revisit and reintegrate the principle into my own life, because the book is about half what I learned from them, and then taking that insight and talking about how I've experienced it in my own career for good or for bad, or how I've seen somebody else struggle or succeed in it. So thank you for the shout out on the book. I think it's going to be a powerful book. And really my goal is to turn the spotlight on these 40 people, right? I'm sort of the Larry King, far cry from Larry King, although he's agreed to endorse the book.
I saw
I'm
that.
trying to bring interest to 40 people who I think are great, abundant thought leaders and bring insight to what they've learned in their careers.
You know, it's incredible. And the reason I asked about the experience in writing this book is the individuals that you've had conversations with, and at this point you've had over 100 and some odd interviews with just some amazing people. The process of figuring out not only who am I going to select for this book, and you did mention that there's going to be a series, which is good, that's great, but also trying to figure out, with all that knowledge and the conversations that you've had and the experiences that you've shared with these individuals, whether it's in their kitchen or on their way to an event, or how do you take that information, distill it, and be able to come up with very specific lessons? There must be thousands of stories that you've heard.
Yeah, there were. Usually something stands out instantly in me meeting them or having a pre-consult or having dinner. I do a lot of things poorly. I'm a fairly good synthesizer and aggregator and discerner, if those are words. And so it wasn't hard for me to select the transformative insight. I actually wrestled with the publisher because this is a broad book. There is some parenting tips, there's some branding tips, there's some career tips, there's some business strategy tips, and it's a broad book. The tagline originally was around, the 40 greatest business minds, but not all of them are business related. I wanted to write a book that was sort of an aggregator of just wisdom in life, personally and professionally. Coming up in the next volume, I have some members of people of faith that are ministers and clergy. I have some famous celebrities, so even the second will be broader. But selecting the insight wasn't the hard part. It was making sure that I told it in a way that the reader finds it valuable and they can implement it in their life. So I'm really trying to write it in a way that, the insight might not seem prophetic or profound, but I think too often I write, this might seem like a duh insight, but don't dismiss it, because I actually think it's quite transformational. And by the way, what might be transformational for you might not be for somebody else, or it might have been for you, earlier in life or later in life. So it's a broad book to a broad audience, and I'm betting that will still land well.
Yeah. Oh, I am sure it will, and I can't wait. What has brought you the most joy throughout that whole process of writing and the interviewing?
Well, this may sound a little self-serving, but it was the immediacy with which these 40 people agreed to be featured in the book. Now, of course, they're not dumb, right? It's nice to be written in a book that may become a bestseller or may not. I think it was the graciousness with everybody to a T. I mean, big names, General Stanley McChrystal, right? You mentioned Dan Pink. Spoiler alert, Guy Kawasaki, is an amazing, founder at Apple, worked with Steve Jobs. He's written a dozen books. He's got a massive brand. Scott, why did you even ask permission? Of course I'd be honored to be a mentor in your book. So I was honored that these people, every one of which is substantially more qualified than I am to be featured in a book, and their legacies and contributions eclipse me to a T. Everyone was immediately interested, gracious and humble, willing to promote it. And that was validating that the idea was good. But I was just, it was very humbling to think that these people at their stature were interested in having an insight shared with no upside to them financially. None, right? Seth Godin does not need 4 more pages written about him, right? And does not need, right?
Well, Scott, I would say that you are probably selling yourself a bit short. And, clearly, not only have you built relationships, but the the way that you show up and the quality of your message and your leadership path has shown that you're in the right place to be able to deliver that message
That's
and to be able to
gracious.
write this book.
To the
So
extent that's true, to the extent any of that is true, that's a result of people believing in me more than I believed in myself, right? Giving me pre-forgiveness, giving me opportunities, course correcting me, taking me under their wing. Scott, don't do that. Do this. Scott, don't say that. Stop saying that. Do this. Not trying to change me as a person. One of my favorite quotes in the company about me from my supporters is, "Let Scott be Scott," and that scares some people. But to the degree I've earned any platform, it's because I have a series of leaders that believed in me and sometimes even protected me from myself. Right? We've all had those leaders that shepherd us along.
mhm.
So thank you for that consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've touched on this more than once, but it is a journey, and we learn as we go, and we're constantly looking for feedback. How can we improve? We know we all can learn something different. We can all get better. The book that I had referenced toward the beginning, Management Mess to Leadership
Yeah,
Success.
yeah,
In that book, you share 30 strategies and 30 areas where you had to learn some very valuable lessons. And you do that through storytelling and sharing of those lessons with others. Speak to just a couple of those for a moment, because I think it's important to understand that you have been on a journey. You're continuing to grow, but talk about some of that feedback that you've received and how you've come through that and come out the other side.
yeah, sure. Thank you for the setup. So that's my first book, Management Mess to Leadership Success. Honestly, off-brand for Franklin Covey. That was not a very popular book in the beginning because I shared 30 messes in my life. As a lifelong Catholic, that was pretty easy, right? Just confessing your messes. And I didn't mean for it to be a confessional, but I did mean for it to do a couple of things. I meant it to be a different kind of leadership book. I meant it to be a relatable, raw leadership book where perhaps leadership doesn't come naturally to everyone. It
Mm.
doesn't come naturally to me. I've had to learn a lot of the leadership qualities the hard way, but I've come to realize are principles of being a good leader of people. I wrote that book because I wanted to remind people everyone's got a mess going on. Everyone's got a mess in their life, and everybody knows about your messes, right? I love this quote: "You think people don't know. They do. Everybody knows your messes. They're talking about them, they're sharing them. So why not just disarm it and own your mess?" Because as a leader, when you own your own mess, you make it safe, Jay, for others to own theirs. That isn't to license bad behavior or to wallow in your insecurities, but it's to have a transparent, authentic conversation to say, you know what, I'm actually not really good at that. And I don't want to pay the price to actually learn that. So I'm going to double down over here. But I recognize I can't abandon that. I can't neglect that. I can't use that as an excuse to treat people poorly or not be patient or not coach. So the book really was my leadership advice to say the following things. Not everyone should be a leader of people. And that's a pretty unpopular opinion in the leadership business, right? I'm a bit of a pariah to some people because I don't think everyone should be a leader of people. Just like I don't think everyone should be an anesthesiologist or a commercial airline pilot or in sales. And too often we promote individual producers to become the leaders of those teams. That turns out to be a nightmare.
Mm.
You know, the average age that someone is promoted into their first management position, Jay, is age 40. But the average age they receive their first leadership development training, age 42.
Oh gosh.
So most managers are wreaking havoc in their organizations, whether they're entrepreneurs or founders, or whether they're mid-level, senior level, frontline leaders, they're making it up. And they're usually creating carnage in cultures, not because they're bad people, because they're people.
Mm.
And they haven't learned these leadership skills. So some of the ones that I teach are demonstrate humility, listen first, how to have high courage conversations, right? How to resist your urgency addiction. This one I love. I love a good crisis. And if one doesn't exist, oh, I'll cook one up because
I'm sure.
I thrive kind of the burning building syndrome, right? And so I'm always looking to elevate something to an urgency level because that's when I do my best work.
Mm.
It's when I feel validated. The problem with that is then everything becomes an urgent addiction theme and you lose all credibility.
Yeah.
So it's the leader who's a mess who wants to move to success that says to their team, I love a good crisis. I tend to cook things up. If you ever see me elevating something to crisis level and it's not, would you do me a favor? Would you call me out? Maybe in private, but would you just call me out and say, hey, Scott, I see you falling into that pattern. Is this really a crisis? What's going on? And the odds are that if you do it in private, I'm more likely to admit it and then not bring everybody on to my urgency. It's got to be done now by end of the day kind of situation, right? I have 40 examples like that. Sorry, 30 that I share from my own life or from that of others. And I think it's hit a sweet spot because these are 30 challenges that I curated across all of Franklin Covey's 40 years of leadership work in every country in the world, except where it's illegal to work.
Yeah, it's a great read, and I would encourage everyone out there to pick up a copy of this book. It is, Scott had mentioned this before, but the writing is relatable and it's through storytelling, and they are some incredible lessons that we can all learn from, whether you are a new leader or an experienced leader that wants to continue to grow. So I'm very thankful that you've written that book, and it is definitely one to consume and learn.
Oh, shucks. Thanks, man.
So let's talk about mindset for a moment. I would love for you to share how mindset plays a role in your life. And if you wouldn't mind, talk about a leader's mindset.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, I was kind of raised by Dr. Covey, right? He passed 8 years ago as a result of a head injury from a bicycle accident in his 80th year. Obviously well known for the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That book is now in its 30th year, 40 million copies sold. It sold 20,000 copies last week alone.
Amazing.
It's insane. Dr. Covey did not invent these 7 habits, right? He curated them, he numbered them, named them, researched them. And in this book, he popularized this idea of a paradigm. He didn't invent it, he popularized it, right? Your mindset, your belief system. And all of us have deeply enculturated belief systems that are inculcated in us by our parents, our aunts, our principals, our teachers, our first bosses. And so I think it's fundamental to everything Franklin Covey teaches is mindsets drive your behaviors drive your results. If you want to change your results, you have to work on your mindset, not just your behaviors, your belief system. So I co-authored a book, as you mentioned recently, called Everyone Deserves a Great Manager, the 6 critical practices for leading a team. And the first of those 6 critical practices, Jay, as you know, is develop a leader's mindset. Mm-hmm. And a leader's mindset is that your job is to get work done with and through other people. Now, that seems simple enough. I think it's quite profound.
It is.
Because when you believe...
that, Scott. Repeat that again, if you will.
Yeah. A leader's mindset is to get work done with and through other people. This means that you are not the smartest person in the room. That you are not, to quote Liz Wiseman, who wrote the book Multipliers, you're not the genius in the room. You're the genius maker of others. Your job is to recruit and retain quality talent. Get out of the way. But to coach and mentor. When you believe that your job is to get work done as a leader with and through others, it changes your mindset about how patient you are, about how you don't just tolerate, you celebrate different approaches, experiences, diversities, that you realize that you have biases, you have unconscious biases, that you have prejudices against people who are educated differently, their race is different, their gender, their sexual orientation, that you understand you have biases and how are they helping or hurting lift other people up. You realize that people are not your most valuable asset. That's HR bunk. People are not an organization's most valuable asset, Jay. It's the relationships between those people that are your ultimate competitive advantage. Because Jay can have a master black belt in Six Sigma and Scott can be a Rhodes Scholar from Oxford. But if Jay and Scott can't get along, compliment each other, forgive each other, forgive each other, if we can't work well together, the boss doesn't need us. So your mindset as a leader is to understand your job is to build relationships. Your job is to understand what it's like to work here. What's it like to work on a project with me? What's it like to report to me? But I'll take it a step further.
Okay.
As leaders, go home. Ask your partner or spouse, what's it like to be married to me? Go ask your neighbor, what's it like to live next to me? Go ask your mother-in-law, what's it like to have me married to your son or daughter, whatever your situation is. You'll learn a ton about yourself. A leader's mindset is the most fundamental of all 6 practices, because the other 5 practices don't matter if you don't recognize that all of us have warped, incomplete, or inaccurate mindsets about most things. And they're usually deeply rooted from birth. And so the more nimble, the more emotionally agile you are to recognize, you know what, I may not have all the picture, or my experience might actually be precluding me from listening to a new perspective on something. We spend so much energy in organizations valuing experience. And I think the flip side of that is so many people say, well, I have 30 years of experience. No, you have 1 year of experience, typically repeated 29 times.
Yes.
And that may sound arrogant, but it's also true about me, right? You find a groove, you find a mindset, you find a track, and then everybody kind of has to fit into that.
So true.
Be really thoughtful around how rigid your mindsets are.
That's, excuse me, that's very powerful. And it reminded me when you were, when you were talking about mindset, it also reminded me about ego. And then Ryan Holiday's words came to mind, ego is the enemy. And I know from personal experience in my years in various leadership positions, I definitely allowed my ego to get in my way. And I had to learn, and I continue to work on that, to just get out of my own way, get out of my own head.
Can I share 1 minute validation there?
Please.
Jay, I was the chief marketing officer of FranklinCovey for 8 years.
Okay.
And I think my biggest leadership challenge was what you just said. I felt like my job was to be the smartest, the most creative, the most innovative, that I confused the buck stops with me with every idea has to come from me.
Right.
And as a result of that, as I have grown a couple of years out of that role, I look back, I was so insecure in my own contribution that I hired people who were not the most talented in the industry. I hired fine people. They were competent. They were cordial. I liked them, but I was fearful of them eclipsing me in talent or skill. So what I did not do is go out and hire the world's expert at SEO or Google Analytics or marketing automation. I hired people who were sufficient where ultimately they would not eclipse me. And I finally realized through reading Liz Wiseman's book, Multipliers, that was all wrong. That as a leader, my job is to recruit and retain the best possible talent. People who report to me, but are visibly, noticeably, palpably more talented than me in their areas of expertise, and be comfortable with that. Step out of the way, release their passion and talent, cut through the red tape, and then take it a step further. Don't try to hoard them just in my division, but pollinate them throughout the organization, into the Taipei office, over in operations, into supply chain, into the field, and then survey where have I abundantly been able to distribute this talent throughout the organization, not hoard it in my division to make me look like I'm the talent magnet. I've learned a lot on the opposite side of my own insecurities and my own jealousies.
You know, Scott, I love the fact that you are self-aware enough, and I'm sure that's been a process as well, but self-aware enough to ask for feedback, to ask for coaching, to ask for help, and to receive the feedback in such a way that you want to learn from it and you are willing to put it into practice. Man, what a beautiful thing.
I think that's the second most important trait of a leader. Beyond mission and vision and values and systems and structures and processes, I think the number one job of a leader, recruit and retain quality talent. Number two is to give courageous feedback, is to give feedback to people on their blind spots, is to move outside of your comfort zone, discuss the undiscussables, and be that transition figure with anybody, because everybody's got blind spots that they keep repeating into their fourth job, into their third marriage, out of their third bankruptcy, because no one had the courage, the fearlessness to sit them down and say, Jay, I need to have a conversation with you. My intent is to help you build a great career here at FranklinCovey. Jay, I can see a great career for you here at FranklinCovey. And there are some behaviors, Jay, that you're implementing that if you don't get your hands around and stop doing, they're going to require me to exit you from FranklinCovey. Now, that can be done in a way that's both high on courage and high on what we call consideration or diplomacy.
Okay.
Balance both of them. Because a lot of leaders, are gutless wonders, and they'll throw a grenade and then run. That destroys people's confidence, their self-esteem, their self-worth. The opposite is the person who's so shy and so demure and so retiring that you scratch their head when they put you on a performance plan. You're like, what was that about? I don't even know what you're talking about. It's that balance of courage and consideration, giving feedback, and then to your point, being curious and self-aware enough to solicit feedback from others who you trust. Because not all feedback is helpful.
No.
A lot of feedback is about somebody's ex-husband who looks like you, or someone's former boss who talks like you. So the more feedback you get, the more you're able to discern what's about them, what's about me, what's about their jealousy, what's about their desire for me to succeed, right? You learn that through volumes and volumes of feedback, and you come to realize who can you trust, who has your best interest at heart, and who has their own best interests at heart.
Oh, absolutely. And great words. So according to the Business Roundtable's Economic Outlook survey that was completed last month, it was
this will be depressing.
So you may have read this, but the CEOs of some of the nation's largest companies say the business fallout from coronavirus will extend through 2021. So my question to you is, how are you processing what's happening in the world today with regards to the pandemic? And how has your business and the work that you do, how has that been impacted?
Well, so we're a public company. We haven't announced our third quarter results yet, so I'll be cautious about the impact. But of course, like everyone, our business has been enormously impacted, negatively and positively, right? We've seen some clients, of course, leave, and some clients, double down. Here's a couple of insights that I've learned. The pandemic is here to stay. And so now it's just a new reality of how are you going to adapt, pivot, and become more nimble in this new environment, right? I think this idea that work's going to be virtual forever is up for great debate, right? I think there's no question large companies will lessen their physical footprint with large numbers of people that are aggregating. The need to accommodate people's virtual work contribution is here to stay. It may be that they choose to work from home on Mondays or work from home on Fridays or come and go and do different things, but this is the new reality for years to come, making sure that we can work productively in a flexible environment, a virtual environment. Of course, you lose a lot of the creativity and the relationships and the interpersonal connectivity that comes from face-to-face.
Sure.
You can't replace that on Zoom. You'll never replace it. So we're going to have to find this balance. Here's what I think leaders need to do differently. And this is a bit of a buzzword right now, but this is a leadership competency, and that is vulnerability. Gone are the days where people are experiencing a chasm between them and their boss, right? This has to become this. People want to know that their boss is also scared, that their leader also has some concerns. They want to know that your kids are also running around acting like hoodlums in the house while you're on a Zoom call, right? People want to relate to their leader. So leaders, step off your pedestal. Admit that you're also concerned, because you can be humble and confident at the same time. You can be clear and emboldening while still admitting that you're scared. I think there's this idea of, as leaders, stop checking on and check in. That's a mindset shift. People know when they're being checked on. Start checking in. How are you doing? How is it going? What's worrying you today? What's exciting you today? How can I help you? Let me share what I'm also experiencing. Here's what I'm concerned about, right? I think you can project confidence and also be transparent around what's happening in the business. A whole new level of leadership skills are going to have to be employed. I'm often asked the question, Jay, well, I'm worried my people aren't working hard. What should I do? And I think, that thought's never crossed my mind. I have a small team, 10 people. In 4 months, I've never once wondered if they're working hard. Well, that's because as a leader, I'd done some things right, and I'd set very clear expectations prior to COVID-19. I'd made sure people know that they were trusted in this area, and they had to earn the trust in that area. I was very clear around what quality outcomes look like and what acceptable results were and weren't. I was very clear on what bad news versus wrong news looked like. A lot of people think that wrong news is bad news. No, wrong news is wrong news. That means you making it up. Bad news is acceptable. Wrong news is not acceptable. And by the way, I want to know the bad news as early as possible. My job as a leader, pardon me, is to accept bad news. Give it to me as soon as possible. The sooner you give it to me, the faster I can help solve it with you. I think the biggest idea there is the mindset of check in versus check on.
Yeah.
Check in with your people, face to face, like this, via Zoom. I think when it settles out in 2022, we'll see enormous new businesses blossom. People that can't adapt and be nimble to change will atrophy and cease to exist. And change is an emotional process. As a leader, recognize that not every one of your team members comes to change with perhaps the agility or the swiftness that you do. Change is a very emotional process. And as a leader, if you're being empathetic and you're being vulnerable and patient with people, that will pay off in the long term. Because it's the companies that do not meet their people where they are, those that aren't able to be patient and invest in their people, those people will jump ship after they're no longer being held hostage by 20% unemployment. We've seen it every time the economic falls come. It's those companies that reinvested, were patient, loved their people, took care of their people as best they could. Those people stick around when they're no longer held hostage because unemployment is so high. Think about the long term as much as you do the short term, because there will be a war on talent when 2022 comes around. And anybody that feels mistreated or unvalued, or just as a product or commodity in the company, they will jump ship so fast your head will spin. And it will be those that stay because they felt the company was loyal to them in this time of desperation. Now, that takes a lot of patience. It takes wisdom. It takes vision. It takes cash. And I don't want to be a Pollyanna, but there are things you can do to build the loyalty of your people during this next 18 months that will pay you dividends when the world rights itself and everybody is, like I said, jumping ship to new cultures because they had no options in 2020 and 2021. Long answer, I apologize.
No, it's great advice. Thank you for sharing it that way. Please, everyone, listen. So before I ask my last question, it's amazing how quickly time can fly, and I want to be respectful of your time. Where can we connect with you?
My wife will say, where can you not? The guy's way overexposed. So I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. I'd love to have you follow me and connect on LinkedIn. As you mentioned, I'm privileged to host what is now the world's largest leadership podcast called On Leadership with FranklinCovey. On Leadership with Scott Miller. You can visit franklincovey.com and subscribe. You can Google on Leadership with Scott Miller. I'd be honored if you subscribed. After you, of course, subscribe to Jay's podcast if you're not subscribed yet.
Thank you.
And I'm honored to be a guest today, Jay. Thanks for the platform.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And I just want you to know how grateful I am and appreciative of the works that you've put out. Your podcasts are amazing. Your books are fantastic. And I cannot wait until the new book comes out. And I can tell
I'll make sure you get a pre-release copy, okay?
I am absolutely going to read it, consume it the moment it hits. So thank you for that. And for all of you listening, please do make a point to connect with Scott. Find out what he's all about. If you're not already aware, subscribe and check out his podcast. It truly is life-changing, and it will transform your life if you're willing to listen, keep your eyes open, learn, and adapt. So here is my final question to you. What are the top 1 to 2 lessons that you've learned about yourself and your relationships since the start of COVID-19?
Well, I've learned that there's a difference between being efficient and being effective. And I learned this prior to COVID-19. Dr. Covey wrote the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, not highly efficient people. And that efficient people, with efficient mindsets, which I'm a poster child for efficiency. I love productivity, checking things off, getting things done. You can't be efficient with people. You have to be effective with people. That requires you to slow down, take your time, listen, not with the intent to respond, but with the intent to understand. Dr. Covey said with people, fast is slow, and slow is fast. So in the pandemic, I think relationships are all that matters. Slow down and be effective in all of your relationships.
There you go. Words of wisdom. Thank you. And again, I truly appreciate you being here today and sharing of your knowledge and of your wisdom with our audience. Thank you. And for the rest of you, thank you so very much for watching today. And if you found value in this episode, please go ahead and like and share with your friends, and be sure to subscribe to this channel. And until next time, stay healthy and optimistic, keep learning and growing. And to quote Dr. Covey again, be a light, not a judge. Be a model, not a critic. And remember that transformative change in your life and in business always begins with you, and nothing happens until you take action. And we will see you on the next episode of Business Minds Coffee Chat.